Hello, everyone. Welcome to part one of a two-part series I'm doing. I'm calling it a crash course on faith. So these are going to be relatively shorter videos, and they're going to kind of be summarizing some of the main views of faith that I've defended or I think are pretty plausible. So this is part one, and part one is really just going to be focusing on the question, what is faith? I'm going to be sharing with you my four-part definition. So before we jump in though, I want to say that I have been a little bit MIA on YouTube. I haven't posted in about 2 months, but that's for a kind of exciting reason, which is that I'm pregnant. Yay! So I'm about 4 months in. I'm due at the end of November. Just wanted to share that with you all. Pregnancy can be a little bit rough, and I've definitely been sick a little bit, and I just haven't been able to keep up with the YouTube stuff as much as I would like, but I think that's for a good reason, a happy reason. So there's our little baby. This is the heartbeat. Anyway, kind of exciting. Just wanted to share that fun news with you all. Okay, so let's jump into our topic for today. What actually both parts of this crash course are taken from is this paper. It was published in this handbook for philosophy of religion by Rowman and Littlefield. And my chapter is called Faith and Reason. Basically what my chapter is it's introducing the concept of faith and the relationship between faith and reason to a more broad or popular level audience. So it's supposed to be written to be pretty accessible, a lot more accessible than kind of your average journal article. And if you like this series, I encourage you to go check out that paper. I'll link it in the description, but it's going to have kind of what we covered today, but in even more detail and also with some citations and other things you can check out as well. Okay, so as an overview of today, part one is going to be focusing on descriptive questions. Descriptive questions just describe the way things are. The main question we're going to be asking and answering today is the question of what is faith? So we'll start off with a couple preliminaries, sort of noting the kind of faith I'm interested in and a couple caveats. And then we're going to talk about my four-part definition of faith. And to give you a little preview, basically, I think faith involves a belief-like component, a desire-like component, a commitment, and a level of resilience. We'll get into all of that in a second. First, let's start off with a couple of preliminaries. So first is that there's a lot of different kinds of faith. I actually have an article that will hopefully be coming out sometime in the next year or so in the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy, where I go through a lot of these in a lot more detail. But basically, it is kind of hard to just say this one thing is faith. I think there are different kinds of faith, different ways that faith might be exemplified. So the definition I'm going to supply today is going to be a definition of a specific kind of faith, although I think it's an important kind of faith. And there's sort of two more specific things that we'll be honing in on. The first is propositional faith. So this is faith that a certain statement, also known as a proposition, is true. You could have faith in God or faith in your spouse. That's not propositional faith because the object of that faith is a person or God. You could have faith in recycling. The object of that is an ideal. We're going to be focusing on statements like faith that God exists or faith that my spouse has been faithful to me. So faith in statements or propositions, faith that they're true, more precisely. And then the second distinction is we're also going to be focusing on faith as a mental state. I actually think this is a really important distinction between faith as something that's more belief-like, at least in the sense that it's a thing that's in your head. It's a mental state. Beliefs and desires and emotions, those are mental states. Faith, there's a type of faith that's similar to those. And that's opposed to faith as an action, as a thing that you do. And then you can, there's interesting questions about whether you could have faith that's an action without faith as a mental state, and then also vice versa. Could you have faith as a mental state without faith as an action? Those are going to kind of go beyond the scope today, but just note those are some interesting questions. The final thing I want to note, I think is important, is that faith can be a religious thing. And when a lot of people hear the word faith, they think about religious faith, faith in God, or faith that God exists, or faith in certain religious doctrines. But it doesn't have to be. So, like I said, we could have faith that God exists, but we could also have faith that my team will win the game tonight, faith that my spouse is a good person. And so I think a lot of what we're actually going to be talking about today can apply to both religious faith and non-religious faith. And so I think that's important. It's not just meant to be an analysis of a religious thing, but it's meant to kind of apply to many of the examples like the ones we've talked about in the bullet points, and we'll talk about more as we go. Okay, so those are some preliminaries. So I'm going to sort of give you the 4-part definition of faith first, and then go into each part in more detail. So here's, excuse me, my 4-part definition of faith. First, faith has a belief-like component. Second, faith has a desire-like component. Third, faith involves a commitment. And finally, faith is resilient. And specifically resilient in the face of counter evidence, although I'm actually open to it being resilient in the face of other things as well, like the face of loss of desire, for example. Okay, so let's talk about each of these 4 components in a little bit more detail. Okay, so first is the belief-like component of faith. And remember, we're analyzing faith as a mental state. So faith as a thing that's in your head. So if you have faith that some statement is true, you'll likely have some degree of confidence that it's true. For example, you might think that thing is likely, or that thing is supported by my evidence. If you have faith that my team will win, you'll think there's a decent chance that we win. You'll think you have good evidence that we'll win. You'll have some confidence that we'll win. If you think something's impossible, you can't, and at least you definitely shouldn't have faith that it's true, right? So I can't have faith that there's a square circle. I can't have faith that COVID isn't real. I mean, that'd be great if COVID wasn't real, right? But I can't have faith in those things because I just think they're way too unlikely or even impossible. So there's a debate here. One of the things that we won't necessarily get into a lot today, but in that Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy article, I talk about this and give some of the arguments on each side. Some people think faith always involves a belief. So every time you have faith that God exists, faith that your spouse is a good person, faith that going vegetarian is the best way to help the environment, any of these examples, you also believe those things. If I have faith that God exists, I have to believe that God exists. If I have faith that my spouse is a good person, I have to believe that. If I have faith that I can survive this concentration camp, I have to believe that, right? And that's one common view a lot of philosophers in the faith literature defend. Others say, okay, belief is this important and central attitude in epistemology, but there's other attitudes that are pretty similar to belief and kind of can play a related role. That would be like high confidence. I'm highly confident that God exists. I think it's probably true that God exists. I think it's the most likely of the options I'm considering. And so some people say, we don't need to make it just focused on or just about belief, but sometimes you could have one of these other belief-like attitudes towards the object of faith and still have faith. And they think this can actually help when we doubt so much that we can't believe anymore. That doesn't mean we have to give up our faith. Whereas the people who want to say that faith involves beliefs, they want to say, okay, hold on. If you have faith without belief, it seems like you're just playing pretend, and there's something that's problematic about that. So there's this debate going on. Thankfully, the way we've defined it, we don't have to take a stance on this. So this belief-like component could be interpreted just as a belief. And if you think faith always involves belief, this will always be a belief. Or it could be interpreted as one of these weaker states that's still belief-like, but not a full-blown, flat-out belief. Okay, so that's component 1. Now let's move to component 2, which is a desire-like component. So the basic insight here is that when you have faith that something is true, you want it to be true. Faith involves a desire. So if I have faith that your team will win, I want them to win. I'm cheering for them. It would be weird to say I have faith your team will win and then start cheering for the other team. That indicates I really don't have faith you'll win. I'm on the side of the other team, right? And this also explains why I don't have faith that I have cancer, or I don't have faith that my friend will never quit smoking. Why? Because I don't want those things to be true. You can't have faith, even if I'm very confident I have cancer, I believe I have cancer, I believe my friend will never quit smoking. I don't have faith because I'm not for those things. I'm not pro those things. And so I think this brings out an important difference between faith and just mere belief. Belief doesn't always involve a desire, whereas faith does. So note that you could still say faith and mere belief are different, but faith always leads to a belief. It's just that belief doesn't always lead to faith. So faith entails belief. Then the question is, belief does not entail faith. The question is whether faith entails belief. But because of this desire component, just because you believe something doesn't mean you have faith in it, or faith that it's true. Okay, so that's the second component of faith, the desire-like component. Now let's move to component 3. Excuse me, a little bit sick over here, the commitment component. So faith, it helps us keep our commitments over time. And I think this is actually one of the key and most important features of faith. One reason that faith plays an important role in our lives is because we have these commitments that we want to keep, and faith helps us with that. So religious commitment is one example, but remember we said it doesn't just have to be about religion. A marriage, I think, is another example. Faith plays a very important role in keeping a marriage commitment over time. Friendship, we're committed to our friends, we're dedicated to them, and we have faith in certain things about our friends. We also have personal goals and ambitions. So you might commit to picking up a new instrument, or you might commit to working out 3 times a week or writing every day. Faith can help us keep those goals. You might also have a commitment to certain political or ethical causes. So one kind of common cause a lot of philosophers are committed to, it's what's called effective altruism. There's also, political movements, whether that's faith that some political party would, kind of has the best plan for our country, or faith that, like I said, vegetarianism or veganism is the best way to protect animals or save the environment or something. So we have kind of these commitments, these things that are important to us, close to our life goals and ambitions. And one thing about these commitments is that sometimes we question these commitments. We make a commitment, and often at the beginning, we're excited about it, we're confident in it, and then we're like, is the basis of this commitment really true? Like, does God really exist? Or, is my spouse really the kind of person I should have committed to? And then we can also wonder, like, is this a good thing? Is this the thing that I should have committed to? So that's almost questioning the desire component. Like, even if God exists, is God someone I would want to commit my life to? Is maybe eating meat is a good way to save the environment, but is it worth it? Is that something that's desirable relative to sort of the downsides of not eating meat? So, we question these commitments. Sometimes that's a good thing, because sometimes the commitment is a bad one. We shouldn't have made it in the first place. The person we're friends with really isn't trustworthy, or the personal goal we set for ourselves, we're just really not cut out for it or whatever. But in other cases, we're kind of getting this counter evidence or this doubt that's actually not true. It's not pointing us to the truth. We sometimes doubt things for various reasons. Sometimes we just get evidence, but it's not evidence pointing us to the truth. Other times, I think we just doubt ourselves or doubt other people with no evidence, just because it's hard to keep a commitment for a very long time. And so in these kinds of cases, this idea that faith can keep us going is actually a really good thing. And in the next video, we'll talk more about ways that faith might keep us going in light of counter evidence, in light of these obstacles we face to our commitments. So that's the third component of faith. And the final component of faith, this is actually related to the one we just talked about, is resilience. So faith is resilient in part because of this connection faith has to commitment. So we might receive evidence. We might be married and receive evidence, I really shouldn't have married so-and-so, right? Or evidence that God doesn't exist. We have a religious commitment, and then we're like, what do I say about the problem of evil? It's a really hard problem. We might receive evidence about ourselves that we're just not cut out for this degree. You declare a certain major that's your dream major, and then you fail the first class that's a required class for that major, or you really just aren't enjoying the new instrument that you've picked up, or you're really bad at it, or whatever. And so the idea is that faith, part of the function of faith is that it keeps us going even in light of this counter evidence. So in that sense, faith is resilient. The big puzzle here is, how is that rational? When we get counter evidence, shouldn't we be responsive to that? And we're going to be covering that in the next video, so stay tuned. Okay. So this is going to be a shorter video today. That's going to be basically it, but I will summarize sort of what we've covered today. We basically talked about the definition of faith, And it has 1, a belief-like component, 2, a desire-like component, 3, it involves a commitment, and then 4, it's resilient in the face of counter evidence. All right, well, stay tuned for part 2, especially if you enjoyed this. We will be talking more about faith and rationality.